Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk! Alright, I haven't done a coffee talk in a long time. And I took some time off last week to spend with my mother. And so I felt like I owed y'all a bonus video or two. So let's do Coffee Talk today. We're talking about one of my favorite topics, John Titor. Dum. Was John Titor right? Was he really a time traveler, or did he just have some insight into the human condition? Now, we understand that his timeline did not follow through with his predictions, but the overall gist of his predictions have actually played out over time. Now, as a quick recap, for those of you who may not be aware, I think most people are aware of the John Titor time traveler story, how this mysterious caller started posting online and calling into Coast to Coast with Art Bell, a late night paranormal radio program. And this was some time ago, before Y2K. So I'm thinking it was the late 90s, right before 2000. And so the Y2K incident is what changed the timeline. Because in his timeline, the Civil War broke out after the Y2K incident occurred and the power grid went down. And that's what kind of caused things to come unhinged to begin with. And so that obviously did not happen. And so in him, because it didn't happen, according to Titor, according to some of the Titor information, because John Titor is said to have produced the necessary patch to prohibit the power grid from going down and getting it into the right hands. So warning people about the Y2K thing ahead of time. The warning that John Titor gave us, supposedly, according to Titor legend, anyway, caused us to skew from his timeline into another alternate timeline, taking the Civil War element and pushing it off for who knows how long. So we're in uncharted territory, but at the same time, we kind of know what to expect on the global scene, because whether this happened 20 years ago or now, the dynamics are very similar from 20 years ago. So what did Titor say would happen, and how can that correlate between what's happening now? Now, many of you know that I did a video about 4 years ago, called it was Civil War and World War III happening right now. Because I believe that the basic elements of both World War III and the Civil War to come in the United States were already occurring 5 years ago, when I predicted that they were already happening. That Civil War and or World War III could break out at any moment. In Titor's predictions, that's exactly what happens. That America is sidelined from World War III to a great degree by its own Civil War. And in Titor's timeline, the Civil War broke out and was exacerbated, really, by the power grid going down due to Y2K. So what could make the power grid go down now that could cause the kind of chaos and overthrow of civil authorities and that sort of thing in this timeline, in our current day? Well, the power grid going down, obviously. So are we under threat of the power grid going down? In the Titor timeline, it went down because of Y2K, which Titor then fixed before it happened, creating this new timeline. But for us, the threat of EMP is something that that looms heavy. The idea that another country could just turn out the lights in America. And I hate to say this, but I believe with my whole intellect, and that if Russia feels like we are a threat to them in what it is that they're doing in Europe, if they feel like we're interfering, if they feel like, for instance, we're responsible maybe for the pipelines, if they think that the U.S. is actually responsible for the bridges that are being blown there, and the civilian infrastructure that's being attacked strategically, then Russia might decide that America is too much trouble and is in their way, and the quickest way to make America withdraw into itself is to turn off the power grid? Can Russia turn off our power grid? I think it's very clear that they can, and they can at any time. And it doesn't even require a nuclear explosion at this point. Nuclear, so stop. It's a Texas thing. EA and U, it sounds the same in Texan. But a nuclear uh, event, it doesn't even require that anymore. Um, some people believe that China has a satellite. We know that China has a satellite that crosses the United States east to west daily or twice a day, something like that. I think daily, and it might be twice a day. But there's a satellite that can just zap us whenever it wants to and turn off our power grid. Now, countries won't do this because they're afraid that we'll retaliate because taking the power grid down won't stop our military. They're insulated from that. Taking down the power grid will only affect the civilian population, which would sideline the civilian government and in so many ways force us to tend to our own business and not be at play in the world scene. However, if we had reliable intel that this was done to us by a specific country, we might unleash nuclear weapons against this country that we believe is responsible for taking down our power grid. So there's that. What's another way that maybe deviates from the Titor timeline? Because remember, we have deviated from the Titor timeline because Y2K did not shut down the power grid, and that's because of Titor's interference. If you believe the theory. I need more coffee. So, if we're on a new timeline, then anything could happen, right? We could face the specter of the Russian earthquake torpedoes. Dum dum dum! Earthquake torpedoes. What's that say? That sounds scary. Earthquake. Tsunami torpedoes. The tsunami torpedoes are coming. Hang on, I gotta turn the heat down. I'm burning up. Small house living. You just bend over and hit the button. So, what are tsunami torpedoes? Well, apparently the Russians have this technology where they can send out essentially torpedo drones and drive them through the ocean for miles. From deep out in sea, they can drive these torpedoes right up close to the shoreline of any country and park them there indefinitely. Just put them into sleep mode and they will stay there till they turn them back on and go, now blow up, or go further in and blow up, or go here and blow up. And they're just sitting there conserving their energy, waiting. And once those are deployed, a sneak attack could happen at any point. The theory is you can lay these submarine-based torpedo drones on, and they're nuclear, so you can and they can do both, but you put them in the strategic spot over a fault line, like say the Cascadia subduction zone, the one that we're already afraid that naturally could flood the entire west coast and destroy most of the Pacific Northwest. The Cascadia subduction zone is a place where you could lay along there a line of these torpedoes, and they could cause the fault line to break, causing massive earthquakes. And even if the fault line didn't break, the actual explosions along there would cause a massive tsunami that could flood the entire west coast, and from what I understand, create a wave 1,800 feet tall. 1,800 feet tall. That would shoot right over the coastal range of mountains all across the Pacific Northwest and flood the interior valleys. There would be nothing left of Portland. There would be nothing left of Seattle. There would be nothing left of the capital of Oregon. The entire interior valley from Eugene to Seattle could become underwater with the flip of a switch. Dun dun dun! Ah! God bless Oklahoma. Try getting a 1,600-foot wave this far inland. We'll be watching it on the news. World War III, not something to be joking about, but you gotta laugh to keep from crying. And this is Coffee Talk. This is fun. This is what we do for fun. Hey, it's a break from all the devil fighting. Sometimes you just gotta take a break from all the devil fighting. So, what happens if any of these things occur and take us out of the world scene? I think a breakdown in society would bring about a total dismantling of the United States from its own people. We would dismantle it from the inside out. In the event of some kind of massive chaos like that, I think states would turn internally, take care of their own business. If the capital in some way was targeted, dismantling our government structure, it would be a natural thing for states to basically become immediately autonomous and be dealing with their own stuff. And the federal government, as we know it, would cease to exist, at least for a time, if not forever. And you would have a fragmentation of the United States into city states and into rural conglomerations of states. Like, for instance, Oklahoma, Texas, and Missouri could just band together into their own little country for personal defense. That's just one example. Um, Oregon, Idaho, and Northern California could break away and form a union. And so, this kind of splintering of the United States is something that would happen in the event of any of these massive disasters, like an EMP or the tsunami of mega proportions. They can do this any place. They could lay these submarine deployed drones along the East Coast as well and flood many, many miles of coastline. The vast majority of people in the world live within 10 miles of a coastline. That's where your most densely populated areas are, and America is no different. So there, in my head is always the question, why did God move me to Oklahoma? There's lots of reasons why he moved me here, and rest assured, he did move me here. And I know there's lots of spiritual reasons, and I've already done some great works and turned some lives around. And I feel like there was a friend of mine who was headed straight to hell, and I plucked him from the mouth of hell right before his death and brought him back into the kingdom of God. So I know there's that. But also, it's for my own safety, I feel like. I feel like that Oklahoma interior areas are more likely to do well and survive than, say, the coastal regions, who could be susceptible from sea attack. They're seen as the power hubs, so they're a target for any kind of warfare. One of the greatest things about Oklahoma is there's nothing in this state worth blowing up. Just, why waste the bomb? I got a friend who spent his life on a nuclear submarine, and he is an expert in nuclear submarine warfare. He's an engineer, retired. He spent a big majority of his life underwater, right? A big chunk of it anyway. And yeah, he basically told me that. He said the main thing Oklahoma's got going for it, there's nothing here worth bombing. We're not really downwind from anything major, and it goes in line with the fact that when I first moved here, an old Marine wearing a Marine Corps ball cap and his elderly wife, they come by in a ATV, running these dirt roads, and I was out front splitting wood, and they stopped and talked to me, and he was telling me that he had a friend that worked in the Pentagon and for the Department of Defense, and when he told his friend that he'd moved to interior rural Oklahoma when he retired from the Marines, his friend freaked out and he said, "Hey, man, what are you doing? You got to talk to me before you move. You might not have moved to a safe place." And the old Marine was this other old Marine, not my old Marine, but this neighbor Marine of mine. He said, "What do you mean safe? What do you mean safe?" And he goes, "Hang on, I'm going to call you back." And his friend at the Department of Defense did some checking and came back and called me back and said, "Okay, you did fine. You did okay. You're in a safe zone. Where you're at is a safe place. You got lucky picking where you picked." Now, he lives up the road from me. And he said, "Don't you ever move again that you don't call and check with me first, because some places are just unsafe. And so you got a safe place." So I have reason to believe, according to inside information, that Oklahoma, this part of central Oklahoma, is a safe place, whatever that means. Could it mean that we're looking at a different timeline, but a similar story than Titor? When Titor changed the 2000 Y2K incident and made it a big joke by fixing it ahead of time, then he changed the timeline and affected the whole. Um, I mean, everything's skewed. That goes back to the old saying: is if a time traveler goes back in time and says too much, does he change the future? And could he even make himself disappear like Marty McFly in the photograph and Back to the Future? Where his hand starts fading in the photograph because it's happening that events are causing his birth to never occur. Is it possible to mess the timeline up? And one of the things that Titor did talk about is that when you change the past, you're not changing your past. It's impossible to change your own past. If you go back in time and change anything, and some would argue the very fact of going back in time, the very act of going back in time, could cause an alternate universe to split away and start a new alternate reality. And so, therefore, if you went back in time after making a change to try to go back to your timeline, you couldn't. You could only go to the future timeline that you created. Did you follow that? Don't. Time travel has all kinds of difficulties and subtle nuances, right? So what we believe happened changed everything. Obviously, we didn't have the Civil War that he called for when he called for it because he changed things. And so where are we going from here? I still think he's right that America can't stand in the face of a major breakdown of society. That anything, whether it's a major war, whether it's a major terrorist attack, or a natural disaster, I think eventually, as we don't get along anymore, as California becomes so different from Oklahoma, as New York becomes like another planet compared to Butte, Montana, right? When that culture gap gets further and further apart, when there's a greater divide between the city people who are hedonist and all about their self-empowerment and the Bible Belt where people are all about serving God and serving each other, that as those extremes draw further apart, we have nothing holding us together. And because we're a configuration of states to begin with, it's a natural assumption by anybody with a brain that one of the first steps in any kind of disaster is the dissolving of the union and the empowerment of each state to control its own stuff. And there's a growing discontent between certain states and the national government, federal government in this country. So, for instance, Texas is, by all intents and purposes, involved in war on a legal level, on a nonviolent level, with our own federal government over things like everything from the border and the patrolling of the border to gun control. The whole point of being able to make your own suppressors in Texas and thumbing the nose at the National Firearms Act that says you can't. This kind of thing is just going to continue until we will find ourselves separating. And if war is the only way to separate, well, then a lot of people are going to feel, so be it, let the war happen. But I've been saying for some time, this is partly based on reality, partly based on my own evaluation of our current situation, and a little bit on prophecy and things like the Titor timeline, that I believe Civil War and World War III are and have been going on simultaneously. That history will say that the last 5 years has been Civil War, and that the next, we won't see it as Civil War until the bodies pile up. But right now, we are, for all intents and purposes, at war with each other and at war with Russia and China. That's one of the scariest things going on right now, is that there is a coalition, an axis of evil forming around Russia and China. So Russia just attacked the Ukraine, Kiev, with Iranian suicide drones. Are you paying attention to this? That Iranian suicide drones from Iran are raining down on the Ukraine this week. And so you've got nation states and small countries all joining and aligning. There's an alignment apparently between Saudi Arabia and Russia and China right now. They've got Venezuela in their pocket. So this world um, division is starting to occur, lining up us against them and vice versa. And on our side, of course, we have our traditional allies. Um, we better pay more attention to our new allies that are in the region, like Poland and other countries like Finland, and because they're very frightened, they're very afraid. And if we don't snatch them up and give them some kind of NATO protection in this alignment process, many of them might swear allegiance to the evil Axis. But make no mistake, World War III seems to be already well underway, which means that the timeline or the effects of the Titor timeline, the realities of that could still come true to some degree. Um, in the Titor timeline, the Russians nuke all of the American cities, putting an end to the American Civil War. That the Civil War is the city folks against the country folks, the rural areas against the major big metropolis city states like New York and LA. And that when the World War III kind of gets all tangled up in the American Civil War, then Russia will see it as doing the country folks a favor by nuking all of the city states along the coastline. We assume it could be a nuke. At this point, technology has the advancement of 22 years over the Titor timeline. We could see something different, like a massive tsunami triggered by these drones, or an EMP that would cause us to become ineffective on the global scene and force us into internal struggles. Either way, it's an interesting time to be alive, right? Viva la coffee talk. I will say this, I start to look like a prophet because I have been talking about this stuff for about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, a lot longer than that, but on this platform for that long. And I kind of been calling it down the line. So I said 5 years ago, Civil War and World War III were happening at the same time, and it appears like I was correct. And here we are. Well, tell me what you think in the comment section. Is America going to drop their differences and join together to fight against the Russians? Or is this kind of international scene going to cause the division between right and left to grow even deeper? We're starting to see it is already growing very deep because of this. I don't think most people on the right want to go to war with Russia over the Ukraine. And just the CIA and the deep state, they're the ones that want this. And they've got all the major politicians in their pocket too. And so that's where I think we're at right now. Will that turn into a John Titor kind of breakdown of civilization? I don't see how it couldn't, to tell you the truth. How much coffee do you need to swallow it? For me, not much. It's my last cup of coffee for the day. I think I inhaled more than I swallowed. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that coffee talk. I did put a PayPal link in the description. So if you guys want to tip me, and because most of the money that comes from the ministry, nearly all the money that comes from the ministry just goes right down to paying my rent, or not rent, I don't pay rent, but paying my taxes, my electric, just keeping the lights on. But if I have any extra money, it typically goes into preps like canned food. One of these days I'll show you my if I get an extra $1 right now, it's going into canned food. It's like one of these memes going around. I asked my stockbroker what to invest in, and he said ammunition and canned goods. That's where we're at, right? But if you want to throw me a tip down in the description and click on the PayPal and drop me a few bucks, maybe I'll spend it on something for myself. Like I don't know. I have so little fun. You know what? If you send me something, suggest how I spend that tip. All right? I don't even know how to have fun anymore. I'm just a hermit. We'll see you next time on Coffee Talk.